History is not merely a collection of dates and events. It is, a grand tapestry woven with the threads of ambition, rivalry, and the relentless march of empires. At the heart of our story lies one of the greatest conflicts the world has ever known. This was a war that would shake the foundations of the ancient Mediterranean. It was a clash of titans, a struggle for survival and supremacy that would define an era. The Second Punic War was more than just a series of battles. It was an epic saga of military genius, unimaginable hardship, and unwavering resolve. It was a contest that would push two mighty powers, Rome and Carthage, to their absolute limits and beyond. Imagine a world where the future is unwritten. Two great civilizations stand on the brink, each believing in its own divine right to rule. In the West, the burgeoning Roman Republic, a martial society built on discipline, law, and legions. In the South, the mercantile empire of Carthage, a naval power of immense wealth and ancient heritage. A fragile peace hangs between them, a peace born not of friendship, but of exhaustion from their previous bloody encounter. But the embers of that old conflict still glowed hot, fanned by resentment and a thirst for vengeance that had been passed down from one generation to the next. This is the story of that fire reignited. It is a tale of a war that would span continents, from the sun-scorched plains of Spain to the misty mountains of the Alps and the fertile fields of Italy itself. It would see armies of unprecedented size clash in battles of shocking brutality. The names of its key players would become legendary, whispered in awe and fear for centuries to come. This conflict was a crucible, a trial by fire that would forge the destiny of the Western world. The stakes were nothing less than total domination or complete annihilation. Our journey begins in the 3rd century BCE. The Mediterranean is a chessboard of competing powers, but two players dominate the game. The First Punic War had ended, leaving Carthage defeated and humiliated, stripped of its prized possession Sicily and burdened with a heavy indemnity. For Rome, it was a hard-won victory that marked its arrival as a major naval power, but for Carthage, the loss was a festering wound. It was a source of deep-seated anger, a wrong that many believed had to be righted, no matter the cost. The peace was merely an intermission in a much larger drama. On one side of this epic conflict stood the Roman Republic. Rome was a city-state that had grown into a formidable power, conquering and absorbing its neighbors across the Italian peninsula. Its strength was forged in the discipline of its citizen soldiers, the legionaries. These were not mercenaries fighting for pay, they were farmers, craftsmen, and landowners fighting for the survival and glory of their republic. Roman society was built on a foundation of duty, law, and an unshakable belief in their own destiny. They were masters of logistics, engineering, and siege warfare, and they possessed an incredible resilience, an ability to absorb devastating losses and still fight on. The Roman military was a machine of conquest. The legion was its primary instrument, a flexible and highly organized unit capable of adapting to various terrains and tactics. Roman commanders were not necessarily military geniuses in the same vein as an Alexander the Great, but they were often dogged, practical, and utterly ruthless. They were backed by a political system, the Senate, that provided a stable and determined leadership capable of mobilizing the vast human and material resources of Italy. The Romans saw themselves as defenders of order against the perceived greed and treachery of their rivals. They were a rising power, hungry and ambitious, and they would not allow any other to challenge their dominance. Opposite Rome stood the great city of Carthage. Located on the coast of what is now Tunisia, Carthage was an ancient maritime empire, founded centuries earlier by Phoenician settlers. Its power was built on trade, not conquest. Its vast network of ports and trading posts stretched across the western Mediterranean, bringing in immense wealth from Spain, Africa, and the islands. Carthaginian society was dominated by a powerful merchant aristocracy whose primary concerns were profit and the protection of their lucrative trade routes. Their armies were often composed of mercenaries from across their empire, Numidians, Libyans, Iberians, and Gauls, led by Carthaginian officers. While Rome's strength was on land, Carthage's was on the sea. The Carthaginian navy was legendary, its sailors among the most skilled in the ancient world. Their ships, the quinqueremes, were technological marvels that had long dominated the Mediterranean waves. However, the reliance on mercenary soldiers was both a strength and a weakness. While it spared Carthaginian citizens from military service, it also meant their armies could be less reliable and their loyalty was often tied to payment. Carthage was an old, established power, accustomed to its wealth and influence, and it viewed the upstart Romans with a mixture of contempt and growing alarm. In the heart of the Carthaginian establishment, a fire of pure hatred was being nurtured. This hatred was embodied in one family, the Barcids. At its head was Hamilcar Barca, a brilliant general who had led Carthage's forces in Sicily during the First Punic War. He had fought the Romans to a standstill on the island, never losing a battle, only for his political rivals back home to surrender. Hamilcar felt betrayed by his own government and harboured a deep, personal animosity towards Rome. He believed that Carthage's defeat was a temporary setback, a humiliation that had to be avenged for the honour of his city and his family. After the war, Hamilcar took his forces to Spain, a land rich in silver and manpower. There he began to carve out a new empire for Carthage, a personal fiefdom almost independent of the government back home. This was to be the base of operations for his ultimate goal, a second, decisive war against Rome. He trained a new army, loyal only to him, and instilled in his men his own burning desire for revenge. He knew that Carthage could not defeat Rome at sea again. The next war had to be fought on Rome's own soil, striking at the very heart of the Republic. It was in Spain that Hamilcar prepared his greatest weapon. This weapon was not a new type of siege engine or a revolutionary ship design. It was his own son, Hannibal. According to the Roman historian Livy, Hamilcar brought his young son, only 9 years old, to a sacrificial altar. There, amidst the smoke and the solemn rites, he made the boy place his hand on the offering and swear a sacred oath. Hannibal swore that he would never be a friend to Rome. He swore that as soon as he was old enough, he would use fire and steel to destroy the Roman people and their city. This oath would define Hannibal's life. It became the driving force behind his every action, the singular purpose of his existence. He grew up in military camps, learning the arts of war from his father and his brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair. He learned to command men from different cultures, to endure extreme hardship, and to think like his enemy. When Hamilcar was killed in battle and his successor Hasdrubal was later assassinated, the army unanimously chose the 26-year-old Hannibal as its new commander. The instrument of Carthage's revenge was now ready. The boy who had sworn an oath was now a man in command of a powerful veteran army. With Hannibal in command, the situation in Spain grew tense. Rome watched the growing power of the Barcids with increasing unease. They had previously made a treaty with Hannibal's predecessor, Hasdrubal, establishing the Ebro River as the boundary between their spheres of influence. Carthage was not to expand its military operations north of the river, but there was a complication, a small city on the Spanish coast named Saguntum. Saguntum was located south of the Ebro, well within the Carthaginian sphere, but it had formed an alliance with Rome. It was a Roman foothold in Hannibal's backyard, a strategic thorn in his side. Hannibal saw Saguntum as both a threat and an opportunity. He knew that attacking the city would be a direct provocation to Rome. It would be the spark that would ignite the inevitable war. In 219 BCE, he manufactured a dispute with the city and laid siege to it. He was deliberately crossing a line, daring Rome to respond. For 8 long months, the people of Saguntum fought bravely, hoping for Roman aid that never came. The Roman Senate debated and differed, sending envoys but not legions. They underestimated Hannibal's audacity and the speed with which he was prepared to act. The fall of Saguntum was brutal. The city was sacked and its population was either killed or enslaved. When news reached Rome, there was outrage and shock. Their ally had been destroyed while they stood by. There could be no more diplomacy, no more negotiations. Rome sent an embassy to Carthage, demanding that the Carthaginian government hand over Hannibal for punishment. It was a final ultimatum. The Carthaginian Senate, swayed by the power and popularity of the Barcid faction, refused. The lead Roman envoy, Quintus Fabius Maximus, then held up a fold of his toga and issued a chilling choice. "I carry here," he said, "peace and war, take which you will." The Carthaginians defiantly shouted back for him to give them whichever he chose. Fabius let the fold of his toga drop, declaring, "Then we give you war." The declaration echoed in the chamber, sealing the fate of millions. The Second Punic War had officially begun. But the Romans expected a conventional conflict. a repeat of the first war fought in Sicily and at sea. They had no idea what Hannibal was planning. They were preparing to fight the war on their terms, in Spain and Africa. They had no conception of the storm that was about to break over their own heads, brought to them by a man driven by an oath of vengeance. To grasp the Second Punic War's ferocity, we must examine the scars of the First. The First Punic War, from 264 to 241 BCE, was a brutal conflict that fundamentally changed Rome and Carthage. Rome built a navy and ultimately prevailed, gaining control of Sicily at a tremendous cost. For Carthage, defeat meant losing naval supremacy and their most prized territory. The harsh peace treaty crippled their treasury, leading to the mercenary war. Rome seized Sardinia and Corsica, poisoning any chance of lasting peace. This betrayal planted a deep seed of resentment, creating conditions for a future conflict. The Romans had humiliated a proud empire and sown the seeds of hatred. Following the First Punic War, an uneasy peace settled. A new treaty was needed, particularly in the Iberian Peninsula. This land was immensely valuable. The Carthaginian general Hasdrubal negotiated the Ebro Treaty with Rome. Signed in 226 BCE, it stipulated Carthage would not expand north of the Ebro River. However, the treaty contained a fatal flaw: Saguntum. Saguntum had formed a formal alliance with Rome, creating a legal grey zone. This became a ticking time bomb between the two powers. This single city became the flashpoint. While Rome and Carthage debated, Hamilcar Barca was building a new future in Spain. Arriving in 237 BCE, without the Senate's blessing, it was the Barcid family's private venture. Hamilcar aimed to secure Spain's mineral wealth to pay off Carthage's war debts and secretly build a power base for a war of revenge. A master of warfare and diplomacy, he played tribes against each other, using force and alliances. Securing the Sierra Morena mines, he revitalized Carthage's economy and enriched his family. Founding Acre Loic, he ruled his territories with absolute authority. After Hamilcar's death, Hasdrubal the Fair focused on consolidation and founded Quart Hadasht, the heart of Barcid Spain. Upon Hasdrubal's assassination, Hannibal inherited a formidable war machine. His father's kingdom was the launch pad for Hannibal's march toward Italy. With Hannibal in command, the fragile peace was living on borrowed time. His eyes fell upon Saguntum, the Roman allied city. For Hannibal, Saguntum was a test case. He needed a pretext to justify an attack, finding his excuse in 219 BCE. The Saguntines sent desperate appeals to Rome for help. The Roman Senate responded with caution, sending envoys to Hannibal, warning him to leave their ally alone. Hannibal ignored them, deliberately provoking Rome. The siege of Saguntum began, lasting for 8 grueling months, but the aid never came. Eventually, Hannibal's forces breached the walls and the city fell. The news of Saguntum's fall struck Rome like a thunderbolt. There was no more room for diplomacy. The sack of Saguntum forced Rome's hand. The debate in the Senate was no longer about whether there would be a war, but how it should be fought. The public mood was one of fury and a thirst for retribution. Hannibal had not only destroyed a Roman ally, he had insulted the honor of the Republic itself. In early 218 BCE, Rome dispatched a formal embassy to the Carthaginian Senate. This was not a mission of negotiation, it was a final, stark ultimatum. The Roman envoys, led by the elder statesman Quintus Fabius Maximus, laid out their demand in plain terms: surrender Hannibal and his top commanders to Rome for punishment or face war. The scene in the Carthaginian Senate was tense. The city's political factions were deeply divided. Hanno the Great and his supporters argued passionately against war. They warned that Hannibal's reckless ambition would bring ruin upon Carthage. Hanno argued that they should honor the treaty, hand Hannibal over, and make reparations for the destruction of Saguntum. But the Barcid faction, buoyed by the influx of Spanish silver and the popularity of Hannibal's victory, held sway. They argued that Rome was the aggressor, that their interference in Saguntum was the true breach of the treaty. They refused to turn over their heroic general. It was at this moment that the famous theatrical gesture took place. Fabius, sensing the Carthaginians' defiance, clutched a fold in his toga. In this fold, he declared to the assembly, "I bring you both peace and war. Choose which you will have." The Carthaginian senators, in a great roar of defiance, shouted back at him to give them whichever he thought best. In a moment of high drama, Fabius let the fold of his toga fall open. "Then we give you war," he announced. With those 4 words, the fate of the Mediterranean world was sealed. The Second Punic War had officially begun. The Romans, however, made a critical miscalculation. They assumed the war would be fought on their terms, much like the first one. Their plan was straightforward. One consul, Publius Cornelius Scipio, would take an army to Spain to confront Hannibal. The other consul, Tiberius Sempronius Longus, would take a second army to Sicily to prepare for an invasion of Africa itself, striking directly at Carthage. They believed they held the initiative. They had no idea that Hannibal was already one step ahead. He had no intention of waiting in Spain to be attacked. He was about to do the unthinkable, to take the war to the Romans and fulfill the oath he had sworn as a boy. With war declared, Rome planned a 2-pronged attack, one army to Spain, another to invade Africa. But Hannibal planned a lightning strike, taking the war to Italy. He would march his army overland, crossing the Pyrenees and the Alps. Hannibal was betting everything on speed and surprise. Appearing in northern Italy, he aimed to shatter Rome's plans. To execute this audacious plan, Hannibal made meticulous preparations and set his column in motion. He was marching towards destiny. Hannibal's campaign began with a ruthless sweep through Iberian tribes, clearing his path to the Pyrenees. He let thousands of hesitant Spanish troops return home, strengthening his army's resolve. In southern Gaul, Hannibal outpaced Roman expectations, using diplomacy and force to speed toward the Rhone. Facing a Gallic army across the river, he executed a daring flanking maneuver, routing the enemy and crossing with his elephants. Roman scouts arrived too late. Hannibal was already heading for the Alps. Scipio, realizing he'd been outmaneuvered, sent his army to Spain and rushed to defend Italy. Hannibal's march to the mountains was unstoppable. Hannibal's army reached the Alps as winter closed in, facing hostile tribes and deadly terrain. The ascent was brutal. Ambushes, icy cliffs, and starvation decimated his men and elephants. Hannibal led from the front, storming strongholds and inspiring his troops to press on. After 9 days, they reached the summit. Hannibal promised the fertile lands of Italy lay ahead. The descent was even worse. Landslides and snow trapped the army, but Hannibal's engineers carved a path. Only half survived the ordeal, but they had achieved the impossible. Hannibal had crossed the Alps. Hannibal's battered army entered Italy and quickly defeated Scipio's cavalry, rallying Gallic support. Reinforced, Hannibal faced a new Roman army under Sempronius, who was eager for battle. Hannibal lured the Romans into crossing the icy Trebia River, exhausting them before the fight. His elephants and cavalry shattered the Roman lines. A hidden force under Mago struck from the rear, sealing the Romans' fate. The Roman army was annihilated. Northern Italy fell to Hannibal. Rome reeled from defeat, but Hannibal was relentless. He led his army through the Arno marshes, bypassing Roman defences and emerging behind Flaminius. Hannibal ravaged Etruria, provoking Flaminius into pursuit. At Lake Trasimene, Hannibal set a perfect ambush in the fog. The Romans marched blindly into the trap. Carthaginians struck from all sides. The Roman army was destroyed, Flaminius killed. Rome stood defenceless. Rome, desperate, appointed Fabius Maximus dictator, who avoided battle and frustrated Hannibal. The Romans soon abandoned caution, assembling their largest army ever to crush Hannibal at Cannae. Hannibal drew them in with a weak centre, then enveloped the Romans with his elite infantry and cavalry. The Roman legions were surrounded and slaughtered in a massacre. 70,000 Romans died, including a consul and senators. It was Hannibal's greatest victory. Rome faced its darkest hour. The news from Cannae arrived in Rome as a wave of pure terror. It was a catastrophe. An army had been erased from existence. The consul was dead, along with former consuls, a quarter of the Senate, and tens of thousands of citizens. There was no precedent for such a loss. The city was gripped by panic. The gods, it seemed, had abandoned them. Hannibal was now a mere few days' march away, and there were no legions left to stand in his way. In this darkest of hours, the true character of the Roman Republic was revealed. They refused to even entertain the thought of surrender. Rome's response was to dig deep into its reserves of manpower and willpower. They were wounded, bleeding, and surrounded by enemies, but they were not broken. The Fabian strategy of avoiding battle was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. The man who had been mocked as the delayer was now looked to as the savior of the Republic. With Rome in shock, Quintus Fabius Maximus's steady hand offered salvation. Appointed dictator, his Fabian strategy was a radical departure from Roman military tradition. Fabius understood Hannibal's battlefield brilliance and refused direct engagement. Instead, he made the entire Italian peninsula the battlefield. Roman armies shadowed Hannibal, launching small attacks to deny his army food and supplies. It was a war of attrition, designed to weaken the Carthaginian army. This unpopular approach felt like cowardice to the proud Roman society. Dubbed Hannibal's pedagogue, Fabius relentlessly shadowed him. By avoiding battle and harassing supplies, Fabius attacked the foundation of Hannibal's campaign. The shield of Rome bought time to recover and rebuild. Hannibal, undefeated on the battlefield, faced a new war due to the Fabian strategy. Cities like Capua defected to his side, a double-edged sword requiring protection. Hannibal's mobile army became tied down, forced to defend against Roman retribution. The war devolved into sieges, a type of fighting at which the Romans excelled. Hannibal marched on Rome, a gamble to break the siege of Capua, but the Romans didn't panic, and Capua fell. Despite victories, Hannibal was slowly losing the war of attrition. The Romans, with vast manpower, replaced losses, winning through endurance. While the struggle continued in Italy, Rome fought a crucial war in Spain, the source of Hannibal's power. The Scipio brothers aimed to cut him off by stopping reinforcements and silver from Iberia. For nearly a decade, they waged a brilliant campaign against Hasdrubal Barca, winning key battles like Dertosa. They secured alliances with Spanish tribes and pushed into Carthaginian territory, keeping their forces off balance. Capturing silver mines struck at Hannibal's ability to pay mercenaries. Tragically, their campaign ended in disaster in 211 BCE when they divided their forces and were killed. From this defeat, a new hero emerged, Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Africanus. The fall of the Scipio brothers could have been the final straw for the exhausted Roman Republic. The Senate needed a new commander for the Spanish campaign. Into this vacuum stepped the young Scipio, son of the slain commander. Scipio arrived in Spain and electrified the demoralized Roman troops. He possessed a keen strategic mind that seemed to rival Hannibal's own. He captured the enemy's capital, New Carthage, in a single day. The capture of New Carthage fundamentally changed the war in Spain. Back in Italy, the war of attrition was also bearing fruit. The Romans recaptured the crucial port city of Tarentum. The final gamble was for Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal to join him in Italy. The tide was turning, but the fate of the war now hinged on whether Hasdrubal could reach his brother. In Spain, Scipio's victories weakened the Carthaginian cause. Hasdrubal Barca knew the war's fate would be decided in Italy, where his brother Hannibal was trapped. Only reinforcements could turn the tide. Hasdrubal decided to march to Italy, gathering troops and preparing to cross the Alps. It was a monumental gamble. Hasdrubal's crossing was faster than Hannibal's. Aided by friendlier Gallic tribes, he descended into the Po Valley with a fresh army. But fate intervened when messengers coordinating with Hannibal were captured. Rome now knew Hasdrubal's plan. The Republic could now intercept him. The captured dispatch created a crisis for the two Roman consuls. One consul, Marcus Livius, was blocking Hasdrubal's advance. The other, Gaius Claudius Nero, was shadowing Hannibal. Nero learned Hasdrubal was marching south to join Hannibal. Nero made a bold decision, breaking military protocol. He abandoned his post, secretly detaching his best troops. He embarked on a famous forced march. This was a race against time. Nero's plan was to combine forces secretly. But Hasdrubal noticed something was wrong. He realized with dawning horror that he was facing two Roman armies. Hasdrubal retreated. Hasdrubal's nighttime retreat quickly turned into a disaster. His local guides deserted him and his army became lost in the unfamiliar terrain. They wandered aimlessly, trying to find a safe crossing point along the winding banks of the Metaurus River. By dawn, his forces were exhausted, disorganized, and trapped with their backs to the river. The pursuing Roman armies, now combined under the command of both consuls, caught up with them. There was no escape. Hasdrubal had no choice but to turn and fight a battle on ground not of his choosing, with a tired and demoralized army. The decisive moment that would determine the outcome of the entire war had arrived. The Battle of the Metaurus began. Hasdrubal positioned his most reliable Spanish troops on his right wing, placing his less reliable Gallic allies on his left, anchored against a steep, inaccessible hill. The Romans launched a furious assault. The fighting on the Roman left and the Carthaginian right was fierce and bloody, with Hasdrubal's Spanish veterans holding their ground stubbornly against Livius's legions. However, the Roman right wing, commanded by Nero, was unable to attack the Gauls on the Carthaginian left because of the rough terrain. The battle hung in the balance, threatening to become a bloody stalemate that the Romans, despite their advantage, could not decisively win. It was at this critical juncture that Gaius Claudius Nero demonstrated the same tactical brilliance and initiative that had brought him north. Seeing that his front was stalled, he made a bold decision. He detached a large portion of his troops from the Roman right, marched them behind the main Roman line, completely hidden from the enemy's view, and swung them around the entire battlefield. He then slammed this powerful force into the exposed right flank and rear of Hasdrubal's embattled Spanish infantry. This maneuver was the mirror image of Hannibal's tactics at Cannae, a brilliant envelopment that shattered the enemy line. The Carthaginian right wing, attacked from the front, flank, and rear, finally collapsed. The panic spread through the rest of Hasdrubal's army. The Gauls, many of whom were reportedly drunk, broke and fled without putting up much of a fight. The battle turned into a rout, a complete and total slaughter. Hasdrubal, seeing that all was lost, knew his duty. Rather than be captured, he spurred his horse and charged into the heart of a Roman cohort, fighting until he was cut down. He died as befitted a son of Hamilcar Barca. The battle was a crushing Roman victory. Hannibal's last hope for reinforcement was extinguished on the banks of the Metaurus. Following the victory, Consul Gaius Claudius Nero had Hasdrubal's severed head thrown into Hannibal's camp. Hannibal, seeing his dead brother, knew the war was lost, and he was now isolated in Italy. Meanwhile, Scipio defeated the remaining Carthaginian forces in Spain. Scipio, now a conquering hero, proposed a radical new strategy: take the war to Africa. In 204 BCE, Scipio sailed from Sicily and landed on the coast of North Africa. His arrival caused panic in Carthage. Scipio secured an alliance with Massinissa and his Numidian cavalry. Scipio won a series of victories. The situation for Carthage became desperate, and they sued for peace, recalling Hannibal. In 203 BCE, Hannibal returned to Africa after 15 years in Italy. He landed as the last hope of Carthage. Hannibal gathered his veterans and new recruits, facing Scipio before Carthage. The two great generals met. Hannibal sought peace, but Scipio demanded unconditional surrender. The Battle of Zama began October the 19th, 202 BCE. Hannibal deployed war elephants, but Scipio countered with open lanes in his formation. The Roman cavalry, with Numidian allies, crushed the Carthaginian cavalry. They then attacked Hannibal's veterans from the rear. Hannibal's army was destroyed. The Second Punic War was over. On the dusty plains of Zama, the epic duel between Hannibal and Scipio reaches its conclusion. The Second Punic War, a conflict that consumed the Mediterranean, was finally over. This is more than just ancient history. It's a timeless human drama. History is the ultimate source of epic tales. Let's take a brief pause to reflect on the scale of the conflict. Let's take a moment to catch our breath before we delve into the consequences. If you have journeyed with us this far, from Hannibal's oath of vengeance to his final defeat at Zama, then you share my passion for these incredible stories. You understand that history is not just something that happens to other people in the past. It is a living, breathing narrative that we can explore together. My mission is to bring these stories to life, to walk the ancient battlefields, to uncover the lost secrets, and to share the epic sagas that have been left behind for us to discover. But I cannot do it alone. I need a crew of fellow history lovers to join me on this expedition through time. This documentary is just one part of a much larger journey. Every week we release new content exploring different corners of history. We dive into everything from the world of the Vikings to the secrets of the medieval knights, from the rise and fall of ancient Egypt to the dramatic conflicts of the 20th century. If the story of the Second Punic War has captured your imagination, there is a whole world of other incredible tales waiting for you. By following our work, you are not just watching a video, you are becoming part of a community dedicated to uncovering and preserving these amazing histories for everyone. So if you want to make sure you do not miss the next chapter, I would be incredibly grateful if you would take a moment to hit that like button below. It tells us that you enjoyed this story and that you want to see more content just like it. It helps our channel grow and allows us to create even bigger and better historical documentaries. And while you are there, please consider hitting the subscribe button and ringing the notification bell. That way you will be the first to know when we release our next adventure into the past. It is the best way to stay connected and ensure you never miss an episode. Your support is what makes all of this possible. Every like, every comment, and every subscription helps us continue our mission. It allows us to travel to historical sites, to work with experts, and to spend the time needed to research and tell these stories with the detail and passion they deserve. We are a community of explorers, and you are a vital part of the team. Thank you for being here, for your curiosity, and for your passion for the past. Now let's get back to the story and find out what happened after the dust settled at Zama. Thank you for your incredible support. It truly means the world to us. Knowing that you are as passionate about these stories as we are is the ultimate motivation. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. The Battle of Zama. Hannibal's army is shattered, and Scipio stands as the undisputed victor on the plains of Africa. The war is over, but the story is far from finished. The consequences of this colossal conflict would ripple across the centuries, setting Rome on a path to world domination and ensuring the final complete destruction of its great rival Carthage. The end of the war is just the beginning of a new chapter. What happens to our two main characters, Hannibal and Scipio? Does Hannibal face execution, or does he find a way to continue his struggle against Rome? And how does Rome reward Scipio, the man who saved the Republic and defeated its greatest enemy? Their personal stories continue long after the final battle, filled with political intrigue, betrayal, and exile. Their fates are as dramatic and compelling as the war itself. And what of Carthage? The peace terms imposed by Rome were designed not just to punish, but to permanently cripple the city, ensuring it could never again rise to challenge Roman power. And that leads us to our next story. With Carthage finally defeated, Rome was the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. But its destiny lay to the east, in the wealthy, sophisticated, and chaotic world of the Greek kingdoms. These were the successor states to the empire of Alexander the Great, ancient realms with powerful armies and immense riches. Rome, now a battle-hardened superpower, would soon be drawn into a series of new wars, conflicts that would see its legions clash with the Macedonian phalanx and test the Republic in entirely new ways. The end of the Punic Wars marks the beginning of Rome's conquest of the known world. So, stick around for the final part of our documentary. We will explore the harsh terms of the peace treaty, the ultimate fates of Hannibal and Scipio, and the legacy of this incredible war. We will look at how the conflict transformed Roman society, its military, and its politics forever. And we will set the stage for what comes next for Rome's inexorable march towards empire. The story of the Second Punic War is over, but the story of Rome is just getting started. Make sure you are subscribed, because you will not want to miss where this journey takes us next. The Battle of Zama marked a shift in the ancient world's power balance. For Carthage, defeat meant immediate catastrophe. Carthage was neutered as a political and military power. Hannibal's gamble failed, ending Carthage as a great power. For Rome, victory was transformative. The war forged a hardened, professionalized military superpower. Rome emerged as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. The victory set Rome on the path to empire, but also planted the seeds of its destruction. What became of the Titans who had faced each other at Zama? Scipio returned to Rome to celebrate a magnificent triumph and was hailed as the savior. However, his success aroused jealousy and he faced accusations. Disgusted, he retired from public life. Scipio died in self-imposed exile. Hannibal became a political leader in Carthage, enacting reforms. Accused of plotting war, he fled, becoming a fugitive. Cornered by Roman agents, Hannibal chose death over capture, dying defiant. Section 3, The Unfinished War, and next watch, The Ghost of Carthage. The crippling peace treaty should have been the end. Rome was now dominant, but a deep-seated fear of Carthage lingered, fueled by its economic recovery. Cato the Elder famously declared, "Carthago delenda estimated Carthage must be destroyed." King Massinissa encroached on Carthaginian territory, provoking war. This led to the Third Punic War. Rome demanded Carthage be abandoned. The city fell in 146 BCE. It was plundered and burned. The earth was sown with salt. The ghost of Hannibal had finally been exorcised. This brings us to our next watch,